Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Dusty Trails and Tall Tales podcast, where we celebrate the stories, legends, and voices keeping the Western spirit alive. Today, I'm joined by two incredibly prolific and passionate writers, Jeff Mariotte and Howard Weinstein. But
Howdy.
between them, they've written everything from best-selling sci-fi to gripping thrillers, and now they're blazing new trails in the world of Western fiction. Together, they've co-founded Silverado Press, a micropress dedicated to honoring and expanding the Western genre through novels, short stories, and even exciting new projects we'll be talking about today. We're going to dive into their writing journeys, their vision for the genre, and stick around because they've got a special announcement you're going to want to hear firsthand. Jeff, Howard, welcome to the show.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you, Matt.
Good to see you.
Appreciate
for
you having
inviting
us.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, each of you, and what draws you to writing westerns.
Jeff, you want to start?
Okay. I started being interested in westerns as a tiny little kid. I have a picture of me at 3 years old, I think, in a Hopalong Cassidy outfit, and watched westerns on TV. My father worked for the Department of Defense, so we moved to France when I was 5, and there I discovered comic books. Found Roy Rogers comics in a barber's office, Russian barber, who had an office in the U.S. government building, or a shop rather, and he had Roy Rogers comics. So I read those, and I started being in love with comics as well as westerns, and the combination of the two. So the first western stuff that I really wrote was a horror western comic series called Desperados at Image Comics when I was working there. Then I started doing some western short stories, weird western or horror western, and traditional western. And eventually started writing some traditional western stuff, more historical western, and then Howard and I decided to start publishing it too. So my professional background is in book selling. I was a bookstore manager and owner, and I worked in comics publishing and various kinds of editing. So I do have a background in publishing and editing, which comes in very helpful with the Silverado stuff. But I also have many decades worth of Western fandom.
Howard?
My turn, I guess. Yeah, I'm a little older than Jeff, and we kind of grew up in the same time period, late 50s, early 60s, when westerns were everywhere on TV and in movie theaters. And I remember every Saturday morning watching The Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers and a few others, Fury, probably some others I'm forgetting. I was barely old enough that I have some sort of late memories, late 50s, early 60s memories of Maverick and Have Gun Will Travel. And those kind of stuck with me. But as I got a little bit older into the mid and late 60s, that's when Star Trek came along and science fiction started to nudge westerns out of the primary spot a little bit. And I became a super big Star Trek fan and read a book in about 1968 called The Making of Star Trek, which is probably, for anybody who's listening, if you're also a Star Trek or science fiction fan, The Making of Star Trek is probably still the best behind the scenes making of book of any TV series.
Yeah.
And it made me specifically want to write for Star Trek. So Star Trek is how I broke into writing. When I was in college in the early 70s, they did an animated Saturday morning version of Star Trek with the original cast doing their voices. And being 19 years old, most of us, when we're 19, we're basically idiots. And we think the rules that apply to everybody else don't apply to us. And I thought, well, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to sell them a script, right? You know, I live in New York. I go to college in Connecticut. What's to stop me from selling them a script? So I wrote a script. I had an agent, which is a whole other story I won't get into. And the script eventually got to the people at the Filmation Studios who were making the animated Star Trek series right at the exact moment that they needed a script. And I was one of only 6 new episodes they bought for their second season. So a lot of it was luck. My script was in the right place at the right time. And some of it obviously was skill. I had to write a script that passed as professional. And so that kind of opened a bunch of doors for me. And then I became a Star Trek novelist, and I wrote a lot of Star Trek comic books for DC and Marvel and Malibu. And that's where Jeff and I first crossed paths. He was editing for Wildstorm Comics, editing the Star Trek lineup for them. And I did some writing for Jeff, and I knew about his Desperados. And I hadn't really swung back to Westerns yet. But as years went by, I was less optimistic about the future, and I didn't really want to write science fiction anymore, and I couldn't figure out what else to write. And I stumbled across the Encore Western cable TV channel, and I started recording and watching pretty much every episode of Maverick and Have Gun Will Travel. And I thought, what if I tried to write a reboot of Maverick as a novel? And it took me about 6 months to finally get an answer from Warner Brothers, which still owns the rights to Maverick. And the answer was no. But by then, I had done enough research into the time period and thought about the story enough. So I thought I would just write my own original version, obviously not Maverick. And that became my first Western novel, which was Galloway's Gamble. And I was lucky enough to sell that to a great little publisher called 5 Star Publishing. And they wanted more stories with those characters. Unfortunately, by the time I wrote a second one, which was this one, their parent company shut them down, even though they'd been in business for 27 years. And had published 4 books a month and had won lots of awards and gotten great reviews. Their parent company decided that they didn't need 5 Star Publishing anymore, which is how we will eventually get back to why Silverado Press got born. So that's kind of my background in this. So I came to Westerns as a writer much later, and but I really had a ball writing these 2 Galloway's Gamble books. And I do hope to write a few more before I'm done.
Alrighty.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, Jeff, you've written in nearly every genre. How does writing Westerns compare?
It's more research intensive than most, because I mean I've written Star Trek too, not nearly as much as Howard has, but and my first short story was, my first professional sale was a science fiction story. But most of my output has been stuff that takes place basically in the here and now. So, you know, I know what a cell phone is, and I know how this and that work, and I can visit a place and see what it's like. But I can't, although I live in the West, I can't visit a place that is authentically what it was in the Old West. Even the preserved, somewhat preserved places like Tombstone have been modernized. So to find out what places are like and what technology was like and all the details of daily living takes a lot more research to write a Western and make it convincing.
Right.
But beyond that, it's just storytelling. and creating characters and creating suspense, maybe an element of mystery. And those things are more or less the same through the genres. It's just how you set it and how you develop your characters.
And Jeff is not kidding when he talks about research. When I was writing Star Trek and science fiction has to be plausible, but it didn't require a whole lot of research. I mean, we grew up watching Star Trek, which was like going to graduate school for running a starship. And we didn't have to, we just used our knowledge of the series to make sure that the books matched what fans expected. But the difference with, and my westerns tend to be historically based, so I realized very quickly that historical fiction has to be accurate. And if it ain't accurate, there's somebody out there in this day and age on the internet and on social media, there's somebody out there who knows more than you do. And if you get it wrong,
Mm-hmm.
you will be caught and
Yeah,
you will
they'll
be
let you know.
embarrassed publicly. And so for these two books that I did, I probably did close to 6 months of research before I even started to write. But I was glad I did, because people who've read them, with great relief, I've heard from people who've read them that, yeah, you got it right. You got the history right. You got the guns right. You got Texas right in 1870. So it was definitely worth the effort to know that even if nobody noticed the detail that I knew was accurate, I knew it was accurate. And that made me feel better about the whole story. But it's also fun. I love doing research,
Yeah.
because you never know what you're going to run across. And while you're looking for something, you will invariably stumble across something else, which is so perfect for the story you have in mind that you can't help but use it. And that happens to me a lot when I write these books. But that's great. That's the surprise of doing the research.
Yeah.
My
What is
favorite part of research is when I can go to a place that I'm going to write about
Yeah.
and be there in person, and then I know what the character can smell from that spot and what they can see and what they can hear, and that makes it all so much more real. So that's the funnest part of research. But again, I can't really do that with time travel yet.
yeah.
Well, unless we go to living history museums, which aren't exactly the same as they were, obviously, but I think they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, they are.
And um, one of the best things I did in terms of research with the Galloway's Gamble books was my wife and I went to Arizona in 2013, and we we found a place called Old Tucson Studios, which is outside Tucson, and I'm sure Jeff's been there a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it is, I mean, I'm from the East Coast, where we're used to having jets flying overhead all the time, because you're never far from an airport here. But where they were located out in the desert in Arizona, with a national park on one side and a state park on the other side, you were literally completely separated from modern modern day. And as soon as you parked in the parking lot, walked in through the gates, it was literally like stepping through a time portal into 1880 Arizona. And it didn't matter to me that it wasn't an exact replica of what Tucson was like in 1880. To me, it was just sort of a Western town like I've seen in Western TV shows and movies my whole life. And they when I was there, we went back in 2014. But when I was there, those two visits, the staff, who are dressed in period costumes and know the history of especially Arizona, but the West and the Old West in general, they did such a great job of giving you a sense of what life was like, that it really did help me, more so than going to Tombstone, actually. Um, where around every corner there's another group doing a skit about the gunfight at the OK Corral. But at Old Tucson, they really were making an effort to get the historical stories right. And we went there on a weekday, and we went in the morning when they first opened, both times. So there weren't that many tourists visiting. And while most of the tourists, maybe a dozen or 20 people, were following the guide, I would go around a different corner and there would be nobody there except an occasional costumed staff person. And I really felt like I had stepped through the TV screen back into a Western. It also was pretty cool because they had very subtly Western theme music piped in from speakers that you couldn't see. So you really felt like you were in a Western movie or TV show. But it gave me more of a feel for what it was like to be in the Old West. And that was a huge help to me when I was writing it, because otherwise I wouldn't have that feel. Um, but it was great. It was so much fun to visit there. If I lived in Arizona, I would want to work there. That's how much I loved Old Tucson.
It is a great place, and it's separated from the city of Tucson by a mountain range, so it really is isolated and fun to visit.
How have your experiences in other genres influenced your approach to Western storytelling, Jeff?
Yeah.
I think what I was saying, that the elements of storytelling don't necessarily change from genre to genre. The details of a character obviously change, the details of the setting change, the details of technology change. But building suspense, creating mystery, developing characters through dialogue and action, those things are consistent. I haven't written, quote, literary novels and experimental fiction, or anything where those issues would be different or less important versus style or some kind of a experimental storytelling approach. But in genre fiction, those things don't change. So it really is just setting and character, setting including time frame and character that changes, but the mechanics of it are pretty consistent from genre to genre.
And for me, I haven't written as many different genres as Jeff has, but science fiction is not unrelated in terms of storytelling to Westerns. There's a reason why they call a lot of science fiction space operas. There's horse operas and space operas. And I remember Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, actually, his first real break as a serious writer in television was when he wrote roughly 10% of all of the episodes of Have Gun Will Travel. He was one of their main writers in the first 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And so he had that background. And when he created Star Trek, one of the things that I remember, which definitely applies to both science fiction and Westerns, he was talking about the fact that when Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke pulled out his gun and shot at somebody, he didn't stop to explain how a Colt 45 works. He just showed it in action and you accepted it. And Roddenberry felt the same way with Star Trek. Captain Kirk isn't going to have to stop and explain how the phaser works. When the audience sees it in action, you basically accept it. If it seems like it's realistic in any way, you just buy the concept. So, yeah, so like Jeff says, storytelling is storytelling. And also, of course, one of the best science fiction, or one of the most beloved science fiction series from television in the last 25 years was Firefly, which was on Fox in the early 2000s for only one short season. and it developed a cult following that continues to this day. And it was, as much as anything I've ever seen, it was obviously a space Western. I mean,
Oh
they
yeah.
used so many of the Western storytelling notions and tropes in Firefly, and it fit perfectly. Um, I think one of the similarities between science fiction and historical Western stuff is that you are on a frontier to a great extent. And one of the things that Roddenberry sort of baked into the Star Trek concept was they're not in a highly populated, highly civilized part of the universe, part of the galaxy. They're out on the frontier. They're boldly going and exploring strange new worlds. And even when you listen to the music, so much of science fiction music sounds like Western music. In particular, for Star Trek fans, the theme from Deep Space Nine, which was about a space station outpost where there's a sheriff, basically, and there's a mayor, and there's a saloon keeper, and there are the gambling girls, and there are people who come into town looking for trouble, and there are merchants. And when I was putting together a sort of fake, sort of fantasy theme CD of some of my favorite Western music, excuse me. So, of some of my favorite Western music, I included the theme from Deep Space Nine, because if you just listen to it without knowing it's from a science fiction series, you go, wow, that's a great Western theme. Where did that come from? And it came from Star Trek.
Yeah. What inspired the creation of Silverado Press?
To a large extent, it was the unfortunate demise of Five Star Publishing, where a lot of writers felt like they'd found a home. I did. I felt like I'd found a group of people. It's a small company, great group of people. They really cared about what they were doing. And I thought I'd found a publishing home that would last for the rest of my writing career. They liked what I wrote. They liked the ideas I had for more books. And that was great. That's like a writer's dream come true. To find a place where they value you and what you write, and you think that they're just great people to work with. And when Five Star folded back in 2022, I think it was the summer of 2022, a bunch of us went, what the hell are we supposed to do now? As Jeff knows better than I do, there aren't that many publishers that still do Westerns, at least publishers that pay. Writers like to get paid. We
Yeah.
like to write, but we like to get paid. It's really hard work. You know this, Matt, because you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard work, and doing it for free, I'm not sure I'd do anything that requires that much work. It's work I love, but I don't know that I'd do it if I had no opportunity to get paid for it. So a lot of small publishers don't pay their writers in advance, and they split the take if they're lucky and you all sell a bunch of books. But it's really hard. It's only one cut above self-publishing, and you still have to do a lot of the work yourself anyway as the writer. These publishers are shoestring operations. They have a couple of people that work there. Maybe they can do a little publicity for you, but beyond that, there's not much they offer. So a lot of writers these days have turned to self-publishing. And the problem with self-publishing is the writing is actually the easy part.
Yeah.
As hard as it is, it's easier than marketing and promotion.
Yeah.
And most writers are fairly introverted. You know, we go to conventions, we go to meetings, maybe we see friends, we have a good time, but we're not great. We're not super talented at marketing and promotion. And that's the part that you need if you're going to sell books. And so Jeff and I were talking about this back and forth, and we kind of had the idea, well, what if we started something? What if we started our own little tiny press that at first would be to publish our books. And then I said, maybe we don't have to completely reinvent the wheel here. I was associated with a bunch of friends, science fiction writing friends, who back in about, I don't know, about 10, no, more like 12, 13 years ago now, we were at a convention together and we were all bemoaning the state of publishing. And even one of our friends, Peter David, who unfortunately passed away recently, Peter was one of the most successful writers I knew. And he was even having trouble selling after publishing multiple best-selling books, Star Trek books and other science fiction and fantasy books. He was having trouble getting publishers to buy his stuff. So we as a group founded something called Crazy 8 Press. And the idea was there would be 7 or 8 of us, and we would leverage all of our social media presence. Social media was just starting to become a big thing in the early 20-teens, 2012, 2013, when we got Crazy 8 Press started. If we leveraged all of our presences together, we might sort of have a cohesive group that would get enough publicity that it would help boost everyone's books. And the problem was, it was hard to really get something like that organized. But they managed to bounce along for 10 years or so. So I said to Jeff, they already have some of this infrastructure set up. How about if I talk to them and see? And Jeff knew a lot of them anyway, and they knew Jeff. So I said, let me talk to them and see if they would be interested in adding a Western imprint to Crazy 8 Press. And so they bounced it around among them for a couple of their meetings, which were monthly. And they finally said, well, we've kind of been thinking about doing something like that anyway. And so Jeff and I put our heads together and came up with a name. Silverado is one of our favorite movies for both of us, and probably is for a lot of other Western fans. And so we decided we call it Silverado Press. And we kind of played around with some logos and came up with this eagle. And I was stunned when we looked to see, because you always have to see how many other people are already using the name that you think you're original and have thought up all by yourself. And I was stunned to find, after searching the internet high and low, the only other major mention of Silverado is the Chevy truck. And we didn't think anyone would confuse us with the Chevy truck. And so Jeff can pick up the story from there because he knows a lot more about publishing and book selling than I do.
No, you just gave me a great idea. We should develop a marketing relationship with Chevy. Everybody who buys a Silverado truck gets a Silverado book in it.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I'm calling them right after this.
Jeff has a lot of great ideas.
Some of them are even workable. Now, there were other things going on at the time that Five Star folded that Howie didn't mention. Berkeley, which used to have a strong Western program in mass market paperbacks, had shut down their line. They were no longer putting out Westerns. Kensington, Pinnacle, the editor who ran the Western line there was leaving the company. Tor Forge had been putting out some Westerns in hardcover and still does the occasional one, but it's very occasional now. So the opportunities for Western writers were really drying up.
Yeah.
The new people on the block were Wolfpack and Dusty Saddles. Neither of which at the time, I believe, paid in advance. It was like how I was saying, it was split the back end, but you don't get paid up front. So we thought, hey, we can do that just as well as anybody. So we did, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I know.
Jeff has done most of the work.
Yeah.
But I'm the one who has a background in publishing and printing.
Book selling.
book selling, marketing, all that stuff. So
Tell us about the book you've published so far.
the first book we published was a collection of short stories of mine called Bird's Luck. I should have a copy handy, but I don't have it. Looks like that.
Yeah.
Cover art by Bob Bosbell,
Oh,
True
wow.
West magazine.
Yeah.
And he gave me the original painting, which was super nice because it's a really cool piece.
Yeah. Wow, that's impressive.
See, Jeff has contacts.
Yeah.
A blurb on the back from Johnny Boggs and from Don Winslow, the thriller writer. And our Silverado Eagle and the Crazy 8 Press logos,
Yeah.
both on the book. And it came out and it was nicely reviewed, but not in a ton of places. It didn't ever sell a ton of copies, but it sold some. And it convinced us that we could do it. So then our second book was Howard.
On cue. Galloway's Gamble, the one that 5-Star had published, and which had gotten a really great review, which I was very, very pleasantly surprised about, from True West magazine. The rights reverted to me when 5-Star, when it was not in business anymore. The rights revert to the writer, and so I republished. I wanted it to be available because I knew I was going to do Galloway's Gamble 2, and the only way to make a book available when the publisher is no longer in business is to republish it somehow, either yourself or find another publisher interested. So the easiest thing at this point, because we wanted to have at least another book in the Silverado Press lineup, and that was already done, and it was just a matter of getting it redesigned. So Galloway's Gamble became the second Silverado Press book. And did I do Galloway's Gamble 2 before you did? Yes. So with Galloway's Gamble 2, that became the obvious place for it to go. And there's our little set of logos again.
Yeah.
So Galloway's Gamble 2 became the second novel and the third book in the Silverado lineup. But we needed to do, obviously, more than a book every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly slow. And so Jeff, who is, again, better with ideas than I am, and also more willing to do harder work than I am, Jeff came up with a really great idea. So Jeff, why don't you...
Actually, it was Bob's idea first.
Oh, was it?
Remember Bob? One of the Crazy 8 press guys is Bob Greenberger, who was also a Star Trek writer and a friend of both of ours. And he and the other Crazy 8 people were at a convention, I think a Star Trek convention, talking about Silverado, and they thought Silverado should do a short story anthology. And so they came to us, and I said, yeah, why not? We talked about it and said, sure, why not?
Yeah.
So we put together a short story anthology with 16 stories from writers who are well known for their Western work, like Rod Miller, Nick James, Steve Hawkinsmith, Bon McGee, Cheryl
Yeah.
Pearson, and James Reasoner and his wife Livia.
Yeah.
All big names in the Richard Prosh, all
Yeah.
big names in the
I just
Western
finished reading that story.
world. And we came up with Silverado Press Presents Western Stories by Today's Top Writers, Volume 1, which implies that there will be a second volume at some point.
Yeah.
Jeff is very optimistic.
Maybe there will.
Yeah.
But we also got writers from Crazy 8 Press
Yeah.
and friends of Crazy 8 who had never written Westerns before, but loved Westerns,
Really?
mostly science fiction writers, and they wanted to try a Western. And so the book is a combination of stories by people who've written plenty of Westerns and stories by people who had never written a Western but really loved the genre. So Mary Fann, Del Howison, Paul Kupperberg, Kelly Fitzpatrick, Aaron Rosenberg. These people, I think Del had written one Western, and it was well received, but the rest of them had never written a Western at all.
Jeff, don't forget, tell them the concept that you came up with that sort of organized this book.
Did I have a concept?
Yes, the historically based
Oh,
element,
that concept, yes.
which I thought was brilliant.
Every story is based around a particular element in the history, particular event in the history of the Old West. So it didn't have to be about that event, but it had to tie into that event in some way, and that would give the reader the time, the date that this happened. What period am I looking at? I know exactly when this happened. I know where it happened, and it feels like it's part of the real world because it connects to these real world events that did happen. And then if you are intrigued by the event, maybe you'll go into nonfiction, internet or whatever, and learn a little more about Western history that you didn't know before.
And at the end of each story, each individual author wrote a little bit about why they chose, because they got to choose. Jeff gave them the concept, but each writer got to choose his or her own story jumping off point, the historical jumping off point, because it interested them. So not only was this something that I think helps the readers kind of triangulate on the period and the locations where these stories take place, I think it was a brilliant way of helping the writers, especially those who'd never written Westerns before, to actually come up with a story idea, because they had to find something that was historically based and obviously that interested them in particular. And writers do much better at their work when they're writing something that they are passionate about. And so what Jeff did by coming up with that sort of organizing concept, I thought was a great idea. And the kind of what Jeff said about these things sort of being based in reality, that's one of the things that I like the most about writing historical Western fiction and doing the research for it, is that you're writing about a real world. It doesn't exist anymore, although it's connected to the world we live in. So whereas for me, science fiction was a way of kind of extrapolating from today, taking things that are happening in our world, putting them out in the future 100 or 200 or 300 years, and in that way we get to comment on our present day world. And with historical fiction, even if it's 150 years ago, it's still a direct lineage connection to the world we live in. So everything that we go through today is related to something that happened 100 or 200 years ago. And making that connection is really fun for me, because I want the stories that I write, and I think that happened with the stories that Jeff got for Silverado Press Presents. It makes the stories resonate with readers who don't live 150 years ago, in the same way that Star Trek stories resonate with readers and viewers who don't live 300 years in the future.
And there were some really fascinating events that these people found. Von McKee found the crash at Crush, when some promoter genius decided it would be a fun idea to crash two railroad trains together at top speed. It didn't turn out well, let's just say.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. Kelly Fitzpatrick, who's interested in astronomy, wrote a story involving the delivery of this gigantic telescope to the observatory at Flagstaff, Arizona. Mary Fann wrote about Wells Fargo delivering Lincoln's inaugural address across the West. Just some really, the schoolhouse blizzard. Lisa Majewski wrote about the schoolhouse blizzard, which came out of nowhere across the Great Plains and and dropped temperatures so fast that I think a couple of hundred people died from this one storm. Stuff that I had never heard about, despite a considerable amount of reading and research in the Old West. So they're interesting topics, and they're really well done stories. And I'm very proud of the book.
If you do a volume 2, Jeff, would you use that same concept with different writers and see what they came up with, or would you think you'd want to come up with something different?
I think I'd want to come up with something different, but that one's always there in the back pocket in case I don't or can't. So could work. But I like the idea of a theme to organize the stories.
Yeah.
Well, are you looking for submissions for the volume 2?
Not yet. I'll keep you in mind when we do.
Okay.
When if. I've got a few names of people who have already announced their interest. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if we do one. It was a ton of work.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we launched it through Kickstarter, which I don't think has ever been done with a historical Western book in the past. There's a lot of weird Westerns, a lot of horror and science fiction Westerns. Are launched on Kickstarter, but I could not find any indication that an actual straight traditional Western had ever been launched on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
But we did, and we made enough money to put out the book and to be in the black on day one, which is pretty unique for a Western book.
That was one of the lessons that the Crazy 8 gang learned. It's so hard to make even a little bit of money self-publishing that they came up with the idea of, I mean, they didn't invent it, but they hooked on to the idea of doing projects as Kickstarter campaigns. And if you, Matt, know how that works, and other people listening to us know how that works, it's crowdsource funding. And it is a way to get people to support what you want to do, so that you aren't doing it for free, and it gives you a lot of incentive to then actually finish the project, or you have to give the money back. So I was really thrilled that Jeff, again, who did 99.9% of the work, that Jeff managed to bring the Kickstarter campaign home successfully. Because the way it works is you set a fee, or rather you set a goal amount, and if you don't meet the goal amount, you don't keep any of the money. And so it was really down to the wire, which Jeff can tell you more about if he doesn't.
Absolutely was.
Or nightmares for himself.
Yeah. It was down to the wire, but we made it. We exceeded it. We got a stretch goal, which was a story by Rod Miller, who's like a 4-time Spur Award winner, I think.
You all right, Howard?
Yeah, just moving the camera a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, it worked, and we're happy with it.
Well, what's been the biggest challenge so far?
Marketing, getting people to buy the books. We know that it went out to all the people who backed it on Kickstarter, because I mailed them out from here. And now they're available at every place online that sells books, has these books, and you can buy them there. But marketing a book is a never-ending process.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You just go on and on and on, and if you get into like doing Amazon ads or Facebook ads or something, you can wind up going through a lot of money in a hurry with not necessarily much return on it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely the marketing that is the hardest part.
One of the things that readers can do for writers, especially those of us who aren't being published by big publishers, and we're not, We're not Stephen King or James Patterson. Is if you pick up a book from a writer you know, or you meet at a convention or something, or a bookstore signing, and you know they're being published either self-published or by a little publisher, is writing a review of the book, assuming you liked it, writing a review of the book on the book's Amazon page and also maybe on Goodreads, which is owned by Amazon now, but it's sort of a separate listing. And the reason for this is the way Amazon search algorithm works is if you search for Western books and you're not looking for a particular author or a particular title, the books that have more reviews come up higher in the search results. And a lot of people don't know this. So the more reviews that a book has, and reviews don't need to be long, they don't need to be long essays. I had one friend who wrote a really long and detailed review of Galloway's Campbell 2, and he gave away a lot of story spoilers.
Oh, no.
So I suggested to him, first I said, thank you, I really appreciate the time you put in on that. He wrote, it was almost a short story. And I said, but you might want to remove some of the spoilers. And he went, oh, I'm so sorry. So he rewrote the review. But the more reviews a book has, the easier it is for other people who are searching in that genre to find your particular book. So reviews really matter. They really mean a lot. And we really appreciate them. And as I said, they don't have to be long. A line or two is plenty. If you want to write more, great. But, you know, we've gotten to the point where I don't have any compunction about asking people who read the book, people who might see me at a Star Trek convention who also like Westerns. I'm not shy about asking them, please, 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 if you like the book, when you're done, please put a short review up on Amazon. And a lot of them do. I think a lot of people don't think about it. They don't know the importance to us little writers. But once it's explained to them, they're more than happy to do it. And we really do appreciate it. So anybody who's watching and listening with us this evening, or in future points where they find this podcast, we just want to spread that out there. And it's a huge help to writers. It's almost as helpful as actually buying the book, but
Yeah.
Do both. Do both.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the new issue of True West magazine landed in my mailbox, and there was a wonderful review by Stuart Rosebrook, the editor-in-chief of this book.
Yeah.
Really, really liked it and highly praised it, and we were thrilled.
Yeah, that was a fantastic review. I saw it.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the reasons y'all are here is y'all have a special announcement you want to make about an upcoming project, Silverado Press.
Yeah, we are cautiously optimistic about this. We want to launch a sub-imprint of our little tiny imprint called Silverado Classics. We want to reprint, reissue classic Western books, Western novels, with forewords by respected people who place the book in context in the history of the Western novel. So we want to explore the roots of Western fiction, make these books available to everybody, and at the same time explain why they're important to Western fiction, what they established, what tropes or concepts or styles they established way back when that we're still discovering now every time we pick up a traditional Western book. We will start with the beginning. We're going to start at the beginning of traditional Western books with The Virginian by Owen Wister.
Oh, wow.
And we already have in hand the foreword by a writer named Michael Nost, who is really well known in the horror field. Multiple awards won, had a feature length motion picture made from one of his horror novels. But he has kind of decided, I guess, that horror is not where he wants to be. He's not, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he wants to move into Westerns. And I read his first straight Western novella. I wrote a blurb for it. It's really good.
Good.
He has a Western novel coming out in the relatively near future. And he's going to be a great asset to the world of Westerns, as he has been in the world of horror. He's been a real force.
That's
And
great.
he wrote the foreword for The Virginian, in which he talks a little bit about the history of the book, but then he goes into specific elements of The Virginian and draws a straight line from there to how that element is used in mysteries or in science fiction or in horror or in some other genre. Westerns in American publishing, Western novels in American publishing really were the first genre as we think of genres today.
That's the one true American genre in literature.
And so all the rest of the genre fiction grew out of what people were doing with Westerns back in those days. Turn of the century, even a little into the 1800s. So we're going to put out, we don't have a set schedule yet. It's going to be a process that we have to figure out. But starting with the Virginian, and we're looking at a lot of other important books, probably Riders on the Purple Sage, Zane Grey was another natural early book that established a lot of the tropes of Western fiction.
Yeah.
And the way that we're able to do this without it costing Jeff a fortune is that these books are public domain now. And so we're not the only ones. Silverado Press isn't the only ones who have or will be publishing new editions of these classic Westerns. But why should people buy ours? Well, here's where Jeff's connections come in. Jeff knows so many people in all fields of writing, fiction writing. And as he mentioned, I don't know Michael, but I read his intro, and I thought it was great. It certainly taught me things I didn't know and made me think about things I would never have thought of otherwise. So Jeff knows people who can write great intros, and he puts the time into picking people and working with them. And Jeff's editing background, of course, is also a huge help here. So I think that the extra thing that Jeff brings to this, the extra added value, will be the people that he chooses to write the intros, and then working with them to come up with intros that are really intriguing in ways which maybe other publishers who are doing the same thing with classic Westerns that are now public domain, Jeff's knowledge and abilities to do this will make these, I think, extra special, and people will get something extra out of them.
Thank you.
Why do you feel like it's important to preserve and spotlight classic Western fiction?
Like you said, it's the original American genre. It was born here. It's practiced in other parts of the world, but it's never done better than it is here. And I think that we get a lot out of reading new Westerns if we understand the roots of the Western and how those tropes, how those ideas developed, and why we think about the West the way we do. A lot of it comes from Western fiction.
I think some of the appeal also will be that older readers, and a lot of Western readers are old guys like us, right, Jeff? But maybe they read these books when they were kids and they haven't read them in 50 or 60 years. and here's a new reason to go back and read something. I certainly don't remember everything I read when I was a kid or watched when I was a kid, but with a new version of it, a new version that's affordable, and that's certainly going to be one of our goals, is to keep these at an affordable price point, and the addition of a thought-provoking introduction, I think, is not only going to appeal to older readers who remember these stories fondly but don't remember any details about them because they read them so long ago. And, we'd love it if younger readers also latched onto Westerns. And
Yeah.
I think Jeff's idea of giving it that kind of context will appeal to people who may never have read these classics before. They may never even heard of them, let alone read them.
Like we found out with Silverado Press Presents Volume 1, people that we know, writers who are friends of ours, that we didn't know loved Westerns, actually love Westerns.
Yeah.
And want to write them. So let's encourage that.
Yeah.
That's part of what's going to help keep the genre alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Getting younger people reading and writing them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kids like you, Matt.
Yep.
Young whippersnappers like you.
Yeah. Well, that's why I started this channel and this podcast, to spread the word more about Western fiction.
I appreciate
Of course,
it.
I know firsthand how difficult it is to do the social media and book promotion and all that.
Seems like you're good at it, though.
Yeah, well, I had to make myself.
Yeah, that's the key. Gotta
Yeah.
force yourself.
Well, do you think the genre is undergoing somewhat of a revival lately? So it seems like it had its heyday in the 50s and 60s, and it kind of faded away for a while, and then now it seems like it's making a comeback.
It does, for sure.
Every time they say the Western is dead, something else comes along. I mean, it had been dead for years, and then Lonesome Dove came along in the mid-late 80s and knocked everybody's socks off and won every award, both the novel and the TV miniseries. And most people who love Westerns consider the TV miniseries to be among the best filmed Westerns ever, both television and in movie theaters. And then it's dead again. And then Silverado came along around the same time as the movie Silverado came along around the same time as Lonesome Dove. So there was a renaissance in the 80s. Larry McMurtry's other Lonesome Dove related novels became TV miniseries, and some of them were full length series on television as well. And then it goes away again. And then in the early 2000s, Deadwood comes along on HBO. And people who have watched Deadwood consider it to be one of the best Westerns ever done in any medium. And these days, there are actually a lot of relatively low budget Western movies that get made. A lot of them end up going direct to streaming services, but some of them are really good. And they almost always try the formula of getting at least one name actor to be in them. And that kind of draws a little bit of attention. True West might give it some coverage. Kevin Costner is a one-man Western production revival unit, and both fiction and nonfiction. I mean, obviously he starred and was the marquee name on Yellowstone, which became the most popular show on television, broadcast or basic cable, and led to Paramount Plus doing a bunch of Yellowstone spin-offs, which will be either on streaming or on the Paramount network. So
Taylor Sheridan.
Yeah.
Right.
His
his
star rose with that, so he's doing all kinds of things. So yeah, it keeps coming back around. We want to make sure it keeps coming back around in books as well.
So the idea would be to try to help it maintain some momentum, so that 3 or 4 years from now, people aren't repeating the same Westerns are dead.
And if Kevin Costner or Taylor Sheridan wants to purchase the rights to any of our work, we can have that conversation with him.
Yeah. Well, have either of you tried your hand at Western screenwriting? Maybe you could send one of them a script.
I
I
have.
did. I
Did you?
did with the first Alloway's Gamble. Um,
Nice.
People who
Oh,
read it, and I thought as I was writing it that this would be fun to do as a TV movie or something
Oh
like
yeah.
that. And I did write a script. In fact, I wrote a script from the novel before the novel was sold and published. One of the things that bugs me about a lot of the recent lower budget westerns that I'm seeing is they all seem to be the same revenge story.
yeah,
And how many times can you do that? They're overly violent. They don't have enough character development. They don't have any humor. And I mean, seeing the same movie over and over again really is not that interesting to me. And because of the two westerns that I love the most, especially as I've rewatched them, the two Western TV series were Maverick and Have Gun Will Travel, both of which were very different from almost any other Western of that TV time period in the 50s and 60s. Maverick was had a lot of humor in it,
Yeah.
yeah,
and the Maverick brothers were reluctant heroes at best, and Have Gun Will Travel, starring Richard Boone. He was a learned, educated, bon vivant. He knew good wine. He loved opera. He knew how to dress and take the ladies out for an evening, on the town in San Francisco. They were very much more literate, and they hold up pretty well considering how long ago they were made. Part of that was the writing, part of that was the casting. I mean, James Garner and Jack Kelly in Maverick really made an
yeah,
impression on me as a kid, and I still enjoy them as an adult. And I I actually met another recent Western. If people haven't seen it, it's streaming somewhere. Hell on Wheels, which came out. They did 5 or 6 seasons in the mid 2000 teens. So
On AMC.
yeah, I
yeah,
think it was on AMC, and it starred Anson Mount, who I'd really never seen before, but he played a a Civil War, Southern Confederate Civil War veteran. If after the war he goes west and he gets involved with the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's historically based, um, and obviously a lot of fictional characters, but it's grounded in the real story and really gives you a feel for what it must have been like. And Anson Mount now, of course, is starring in one of the newest Star Trek streaming shows, Strange New Worlds, playing Starship Captain Christopher Pike. And I met him at a convention in 2019 before the pandemic shut everything down. And so I was talking to him about Hell on Wheels, and he said he loved making the show and he'd love to do another Western. And at the time, I said to him, tell CBS, because they still own Have Gun Will Travel rights, that you'd like to play Paladin
Oh, that would be great.
reboot of Have Gun Will Travel. And because Anson Mount he can play action, he can play adventure, he can play fight scenes, he can play humor, he can play love stories. He really would be great, and I could definitely see him filling Richard Boone's boots. But
yeah,
apparently, he didn't pursue that. But a lot of actors really love making westerns. One of the things
Oh
that I
yeah.
asked him was when you were doing Hell on Wheels and they shot it in Alberta in Canada out on the prairie, they literally were out in the middle of nowhere and they built the towns, they built the railroad, they built everything from scratch more or less. And I said, is it really fun for you as an actor when you were out there on a set that's complete and realistic and you're wearing the clothing, is that really fun for you? More fun than doing something contemporary based in the 21st century? And he said, yeah, it really is, because you really feel like you're there. You're playing make believe. I mean, actors know that. And
yeah,
he had a really good attitude. He said, I get paid for playing make believe. What could be better than that? But with that in mind, with that approach to acting, he really enjoyed doing the Western
that's cool.
because of how, that same feeling that I got when we walked into old Tucson studios. Like you've actually walked back through a time portal and you're living in the time period.
Another pal who's done great Western stuff on screen, John Fusco, promises that Young Guns 3 is on the way,
Yeah,
and I can't wait.
yeah, that was one of my favorite movies as a kid.
Yeah.
The first two,
Yeah.
even though it's not historically accurate by some accounts, it's still a great movie.
No. Yeah, it's fun.
Do you know who he's doing it for? Is it going to be streaming?
Don't know yet.
Streaming, actually, there are so many streaming platforms. And whereas TV networks had X amount of time to fill, streaming platforms have an infinite amount of time to fill because there's no schedule. They have to keep coming up with new stuff in order to keep people subscribing and keep people watching. And I think that's opened up a lot of opportunities for these medium to low budget Westerns because they need time to they need programs to fill all of the people like us. You know, if you're a streaming subscriber and you go to Netflix or you go to Amazon Prime or you go to Hulu and you go, well, what's on? And you can search, but it's an endless search because there's literally an infinite amount of programming available on these streaming platforms. But they must have decided that there is a niche for Westerns because they keep making them. A lot of if you go to one of those streaming services and you search for Westerns, you'll find a lot of them have been made in the last 10 years. Even in the last 3 or 4 years, they just keep making them. I would like them to be more varied personally. So I didn't get anywhere with the script for Galloway Campbell. I did try.
Yeah.
Maybe I should try some more. I don't know.
Are there any Western movies or classic books that have influenced each of your own writing?
There's a book that I read in 5th or 6th grade called The Mystery of the Haunted Mine by the great Gordon D. Sheriffs. It was a contemporary Western. It was set in Arizona in the 50s. But it had elements of Old West. It was about these two high school kids who go into the Espectro Mountains, which, if you know anything about where in Arizona they are, is the Superstition Mountains. They go into the Espectro Mountains looking for the lost mine, which would be the Lost Dutchman's mine in real life. And things happen that might be supernatural, like supernatural horror kind of things, or might not be. So it has elements of traditional Western fiction. It has elements of mystery. It has elements of horror, suspense, which are all the things I love to write. I read this book in the 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade, and I'm still writing stuff that book triggered in me, and I can now see the Superstition Mountains from my bedroom window. So that book had an impact on me that was enormous on my writing.
Have you found any lost treasure?
No, I have not. But I haven't gone into the mountains with the book and try to go step by step. But yeah, that influenced my life, influenced my work, and got me where I am today. Thanks, Gordon.
Oh, blame him. Yeah, for me, it was more TV and movies than it was books. So the shows that I mentioned that I remembered as a kid, I kind of never forgot how much I enjoyed them. And even when I, as I said, rediscovered them on the Encore Western Channel, and then, of course, some of them are on DVDs now, it's fun watching them again. It kind of brings me back to a simpler time in life, and the fact that I do really enjoy. I've always been interested in history, and I really enjoy doing the research for these stories. That to me is such a treat. It gives me an excuse to read something that I would probably really enjoy reading anyway. But now I have a focused reason for doing it. So, for instance, Galloway's Gamble 3, if I ever actually finish it, is going to be based on the real life bone wars they're referred to. There were paleontology searching for prehistoric fossils was just becoming a serious science in the 1850s and 1860s. And it became very competitive very quickly because the places where they were finding dinosaur bones out in the West were not hospitable places. And they were hard to get to, and the work was grueling, and they had to do it in the summer because these places are not, they're even less hospitable in the winter. And there were two scientists in particular. One was based at, at Yale University, and the other was based in Philadelphia. And they started out as mentor and student, and then they became friends, and then they became competitors, and then they became frenemies. They loathed each other for the last 30 years of their lives.
Wow.
And they fought tooth and nail over finding the best bones. And I thought, this is great. I love dinosaurs. I've always been interested in dinosaurs ever since I was a little kid. And to find out that this was something that actually happened in the 1860s and 1870s, that's my time period for Galloway's Gamble. And by creating a series of books with two brothers who are gamblers, so yeah, that's inspired by Maverick, I can put them anywhere in the West that I want because they travel a lot. And so they're perfect characters for slipping into situations, real life situations, where I can use the history to make the story real while telling a fictional story and having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Well,
Finish it. I said finish it. I want to read it.
Okay. Tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll finish it tomorrow.
Where can our listeners go to find your books? You have a website or at your Amazon page?
I have a website, jeffmariotte.com. On that website, there's a drop-down menu that takes you to my published works, which you can search by series or by genre. And each listing for each book has at least a couple of links, purchase links. There's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. Most of them are still available. Some of them are not. But
And I have much the same thing as Jeff. My website is howardweinsteinbooks.com. And same deal. It's got all the stuff that I've published. It's got links to Amazon where my books are available. So the two Galloway's Gamble novels are available on Amazon. And we publish these generally in both ebook and paperback. So people have a choice. So if they like their little e-readers, and it's summer reading season coming up, and these are really fun stories. The anthologies that Jeff's done and Galloway's Gamble books are really fun for summer reading. Go away on a vacation, kick back at the beach or in the mountains or wherever you happen to be going. Or, if you're touring somewhere and you're exhausted at the end of the day, go back to the hotel or the lodge and sit back and read one of these books. So ebooks are great for that, for traveling. But for people who are doing staycations in their own backyard and still like paperbacks, which I do, then the paperbacks are available as well. And we'd love it if people went. Now, for Silverado Press, you can go to Crazy 8 Press, crazy8press.com, and there is a tab there for Silverado as one of the Crazy 8 imprints. And that's where they can find out other things. And, of course, social media. As we do new things, we post about them. And I know we both write blogs. One of the fun things that I did with the Galloway's Gamble books was, how when you get a DVD or you watch a movie at home and you have a you have a behind the scenes set of featurettes, and I love watching those. And so why not do that for books as well? So I wrote a bunch of blogs on the background of my creation of these two novels, what I learned, and I tried to make them fun to read. They're short, they're illustrated, and they fill in some of the gaps that people might wonder about when they read the books. And so I know Jeff writes blogs too with the books that Silverado has published, so people can read a little more about them, how they came together, and and find that interesting. Also, you get to see how we make the linkages between um, past and present, which to me is the one of the fun parts about writing historical fiction.
Yeah.
Um, is finding out that the world isn't all that different and people aren't all that different than they were 150 years ago, which is both interesting and depressing in some ways. But you know,
Yeah. What's coming up next for Silverado Press?
Next, I think, is going to be digging into the classics line and getting that off the ground. We would love to publish other authors. We know that we can't pay them in advance right now, so they'd have to understand that. And but that's going to be a process that we would have to figure out, the submission process and everything.
Yeah.
With Crazy 8, when we started, we worked out essentially what the boundaries would be. And how the process would work in connection to Crazy 8. But we still have to figure out our own bandwidth for that, and what the processes will be to actually put them out into the world.
I'd also like to mention one thing for anybody who watches the podcast. If they're part of a book club, an online book club, or a book club that's in person, and we happen to live near where you are, Jeff is better situated, unfortunately, than I am, because he's in Arizona and I'm in Maryland. But there are book clubs, and if anybody who has a book club or is part of a book club listens to this, watches this podcast, and they'd love to have us join them if they'd like to read one or more of our books for their book club, even if it's long distance. These days, obviously, we can do things long distance. Probably the only good thing that came out of the pandemic was people getting really used to doing things like this on screen, because there wasn't any other way to do it. But I've done a couple of book clubs online as well as in person, and they're really fun. And for the book clubs, they don't usually get to quiz the author, especially if it's a best-selling author. They don't get to ask questions. What were you thinking when you wrote the book? I didn't like this part, but I love this part. And we enjoy talking about the process, answering questions about how and why we did what we did. So anybody who would want to do that, we're certainly available for book club appearances.
That's good. It's funny you should mention that. I just started in my Facebook group a Western book club, Book of the Month club, where right now I have everybody reading Flint by Louis L'Amour.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. I saw that.
But I was going to tie it into the podcast eventually and have current Western writers have a book about somebody in the current Western writer, and then have them interview them on the podcast, and everybody that's read the book can talk to the writer.
See, Louis L'Amour is a classic, and he's extraordinarily well known in the field. But we have one advantage over him: we're alive.
I know.
So we can join you
for now.
Yeah, don't wait too long. We're not getting any younger.
Well, do either of you have any final thoughts for Western fans or even aspiring Western writers before we go?
Try to walk where they walked, if you can. If you want to write about the West, you don't have to live in the West, but you are well advised to visit the West. Get a sense of what it really is like. Get out of the cities and into the deserts or the plains or the mountains. And if you want to write about a place and you read books about a place and then you go to see the place, you understand it so much better.
Yeah.
I love the West. I'm glad I live here. And
I'm glad I visited.
It makes it easier to write about the area.
It does, absolutely. As somebody who'd never been, I've been to California twice, but that's different. And you fly over the country that is in Westerns for the most part.
If you're in California, you have to go east to go west.
Right. But one of the great things, if you are a Western writer and you don't live in the West and you go to visit, is it's tax deductible travel, at least partly tax deductible travel. So that's my tip. And thanks a lot for having us, Matt. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Folks, that's going to do it.
All right.
For this episode of the Dusty Trails and Tall Tales podcast. Thank you, Jeff and Howard, for being here. If you're interested in Silverado Press, there's links in the description below. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Keep up the good work, Matt.
Yep.